Well, hello, my name is Randy Silva. Welcome to my channel, The Withered Fig Tree. I've been doing podcasts on various topics, various Christian topics, and this particular series is called The Dates and Times of Christianity, and this is part 5, which will be the last part of this series. Let's go ahead and get started. I've got lots to talk about today. So this is part 5, as I mentioned, and it's called The Day of the Week of Jesus' Crucifixion. Now, from last week, we were talking about the year of Jesus' death and whether or not that could be ascertained from a mechanism other than his birthday, because there's uncertainty associated with the year of his birth. How old he was when he started his ministry? It just says about 30. And the length of his ministry. And so that's a lot of uncertainty. So last week, I sort of reverse engineered it by taking the solid date that we know very well of the destruction of the temple on August 9th, 70 AD, with a lesser known fact, but I think every Christian should know about this. It's the 40 years of omens at the temple. These omens started the day of Jesus' crucifixion, and some of them are mentioned in the Gospels at the time of Jesus' death. But then what's lesser known is that they continued to happen a lot of times. We don't know exactly how many times, but in the 40 years before the destruction of the temple, which again was in 70 AD, at every Yom Kippur, which is in September. So from the Yom Kippurs of 30 AD to 69 AD, a bunch of things happened that are really weird. And Christians would call them Christian miracles, where God is trying to inform the Jews or convince the Jews through these omens that the law has been completed, has been fulfilled. Their sacrifices are no longer acceptable because Jesus is the last sacrifice, and they should accept Jesus as the Messiah because he was the Messiah. Text from the Jewish Babylonian Talmud, specifically from Tractate Yoma, page 39b. But there's also mentions of it in Josephus's The Jewish War, Book 6, Chapter 5, Section 3, and also the Roman author Tacitus in his book Histories, Book 5, Chapter 13. So I only talked about the events that happen on Yom Kippur every year from 30 AD until 69 AD, but there's a bunch of things that were mentioned. So I'm just going to go through this list really quickly. So this is more than just a review. This is some additional information from last week. So from the Gospels, we know that darkness came over Jerusalem for the 3 hours that Jesus was on the cross, or the last 3 hours that Jesus was on the cross. We know that when he died, the temple was torn in two, that revealed the Ark of the Covenant behind that temple, behind that curtain. We know that there was an earthquake that split stones and opened tombs. And Matthew talks about the bodies of many holy people coming out of their tombs and appearing to people in Jerusalem. And that was most likely just before, on the day of his resurrection. And then some other things that were mentioned by the other authors. A star or a comet resembling a sword appeared over Jerusalem for a year. A bright light shone around the altar of the temple during Passover for half an hour. The very heavy eastern gate of the temple, which required 20 to 30 men to open, would just open on its own. There was a vision of chariots and soldiers running through the clouds that was seen across the sky. Another one was a cow that had been brought for sacrifice at the temple gave birth to a lamb. There was a guy named Jesus of Ananas who continuously prophesied doom over Jerusalem for years until he was killed during the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And then, as I've already mentioned, every Yom Kippur from 30 AD to 69 AD, I shouldn't say already mentioned, this is what we talked about last week. the high priest who would randomly pick these two different tokens, he would always pick the white lot for God, the white token, and that was for the goat to be sacrificed, and it would always appear in his left hand. And then also at every Yom Kippur, the goat that for the black token then would appear in his right hand, and that token was for the scapegoat, and they would tie a yarn that was dyed in a crimson red. They would let that one go. That's the scapegoat, and that yarn was supposed to turn white. And for these 40 years before destruction of the temple, it did not turn white. What I gather from all this, and I think it's very reasonable from a Christian standpoint, that these miraculous omens were given to the Jews to wake them up to the fact that the law had ended and the sacrifices were no longer accepted, and that Jesus was the Messiah, and those happened at 30 AD, and that would mean that Jesus was crucified on the Passover of 30 AD. All right. To start with today, most of the time we're going to spend on a slide that has a lot of details on it that I'm going to show. But just quickly, in this first point, I want to talk about the various times from Jesus' last day. And one thing I noticed was that the new NIV, the NIV-WS, it translates the original text. That in the original text, it gives times during the day relative to sunrise. So it would say in the 9th hour, the 3rd hour, and the NIV-WS tries to do us a favor and interprets those, interprets is probably a better word, to like 3 o'clock or noon, it says. But in the actual text, it just says a certain number of hours in the day. Now, in the previous version of the NIV 1984, and really all the other major translations use the original timing, a certain number of hours into the day. And that's important because there's a issue in John, and I believe the NIV messes this up, because there's also another timing system, the Roman timing system, and that's just like ours, which starts at midnight. So if that says, the 9th hour, then that would mean 9 o'clock. It wouldn't mean 9 hours after sunrise. Just the events that happened. So of course they had Passover, the very beginning of Passover, because remember the Jewish day starts at twilight and extends to the following twilight. So dusk to dusk. And the 14th of Nisan is the first month of the year, and that Nisan is the first month of the Jewish calendar, and on the 14th of Nisan is Passover. So at the very beginning of the day, right after twilight, you would have slaughtered your lamb, and you would cook it in fire, and you would eat it that night. And so that was the Passover meal. And then we know about Judas, and we know about the people who came to arrest Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And then we know that Jesus was taken to Herod and to the governor and Pilate, finally. And so starting at 6 a.m., so very early in the morning, it says, Pilate has this special court. And John 19:14 says that it was the day of preparation of Passover week, about the 6th hour. Here is your king, Pilate said to the Jews, but they shouted, take him away, crucify him. Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. Finally, Pilate handed him over to be crucified, so the soldiers took charge of Jesus. John chapter 19, verse 14, and a few verses after that. And it says the 6th hour. So if that was Jewish timing, that would mean noon. And the NIV-WS says around noon, Pilate has this court. But then the other Gospels say that Jesus was crucified at 9 in the morning in the 3rd hour. The 3rd hour would be, sunrise would have been around 6 a.m. at that time of the year. And so that would have been 9 in the morning. So how could he have been crucified at 9 in the morning but been tried at noon? That doesn't make sense. And that the reason is because John covers all of the details of this Roman court. So everything has to do with Roman things, Roman events. And so he uses the Roman timing. So the 6th hour in Roman timing is 6 a.m. So NIV shouldn't have interpreted that as, or translated that as noon. It should have said in the 6th hour, or they could translate it as 6 a.m. if they want. Okay, so then we know that Jesus was crucified at 9 in the morning. In Mark 15:25, it says it was the 3rd hour when they crucified him. And we know before he was crucified, so basically from this time of 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., that is when they have this court. Jesus is handed over to the soldiers. The soldiers flog him, and they mock him and beat him, and then they take him for crucifixion. And so then Jesus is crucified around 9 in the morning. It says at Mark 15, verse 25, it was the 3rd hour when they crucified him. So that's the 3rd hour in the Jewish timing system, which is 9 in the morning. So then it says from the 6th hour until the 9th hour, and that is found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In Matthew, chapter 27, verses 45 through 56, it says from the 6th hour until the 9th hour. So that is from noon until 3 p.m. Darkness came over the land. And then it says towards the end of that in verse 56, and when Jesus had cried out in a loud voice again, he gave up his spirit. So Jesus dies around 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Mark 15 and Luke 23 also says, John 19 just says later. Later, knowing that everything had been finished and the scripture had been fulfilled, Jesus says, "It's finished." And then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. So then we know that immediately at Jesus' death, there was an earthquake, or the ground shook, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. And then we know that Jesus' resurrection was on the first day of the week, which would be our Sunday. And Matthew 28, Mark 16, and Luke 24 all agree. They all say that on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. Now, Matthew has some interesting timing in it. Really, all the Gospels have interesting timing except for Luke, which is chronological. But in Matthew, just before Matthew 28, in chapter 27, verses 51 through 56, it says that the earth shook, rocks split, the tombs broke open, the bodies of many holy people who had died before were raised to life. They came out of the tomb and went into this holy city and appeared to many. And when the centurion and those who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." Many women were watching from a distance. This most likely happened not at the time of Jesus' death, but he's talking about when Jesus rose from the dead. And so maybe there was either two earthquakes or one earthquake, but at some point there was an earthquake big enough to break rocks and open the tomb. Okay, good. So that's half of our time, 15 minutes. So let's spend the rest of the time talking about the day of the week of Jesus' crucifixion. Now, traditionally, this is Friday. So we call it Good Friday, and depending on what denomination or whether you're Catholic or so forth, you do different things on Good Friday. This is most likely because of what Mark and John say, the Gospels. In Mark 16:42, it says, "It was preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath. So as evening approached," John 19:31 says, "Now it was the day of preparation, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath. Because the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath, they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down." So I guess that's it then, right? It has to be the day before the regular Saturday Sabbath, right? Well, no. And that's because, and this is pretty well known, I think it's possible that we just use Friday because it's just been established or whatever. But it doesn't have to be a Friday is really the main point if you get anything out of this. He doesn't have to have been crucified on Friday. And that's because we know he was crucified on Passover. Passover itself is a special Sabbath, a high holy day. And then the day following Passover is called the Festival of Unleavened Bread. And that was also a special Sabbath. And that was because food could could be prepared on that day, which is unlike most, unlike regular Sabbaths. And so that is the day that perhaps you're familiar with these Seder meals. So that Seder meal is not the Passover meal. That is the meal of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because the Jews were permitted to prepare food as this special command. And in Exodus 12, verse 16, it says, "On the first day, hold a sacred assembly, and another one on the seventh day. Do no work on all these days except to prepare food for everyone to eat. That is all you may do." The Jews said, wow, God wants us to prepare food. He probably wants us to prepare lots of food. And so they prepared all kinds of different dishes that we have continued all the way until the present day, and that's what's called the Seder meal. The Passover meal is specified, is I guess you'd say more bland. It's just a lamb, which is cooked over fire, bitter herbs, unleavened bread, and wine, and water, I guess. So that's definitely not the Seder meal. So Jesus didn't live long enough to have the Seder meal on this. He had it obviously earlier in his life, but he was crucified, so he didn't get a chance to do that. But he did celebrate the Passover, and that is the Last Supper. Okay, now, where does the problem come? Why does it even matter whether it's Friday, Thursday, or some other day? That is because on Matthew chapter 12, verse 40, it says, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Now, the other Gospels just say 3 days, but Matthew is very clear, and he says it twice. And so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Now, if somebody just says you're going to be in the tomb or you're going to do something for 3 days, that could mean a lot of different things. If somebody says 3 days, what could that mean? So that could mean, probably most of us in modern terms, they would think of 3 24-hour periods. So 72 hours, they would think. That means in 72 hours, this person's going to do whatever they said. If you thought of it more colloquially, if it's, let's say it's a Wednesday, and they say, hey, 3 days from now, I'll come back and do this, then that would mean it's a Wednesday. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that means Saturday something's going to happen. So it could mean just a certain number of days in a colloquial sense. When somebody specifies days and nights, then they're specifying not just a 24-hour period or a particular day, but they're specifying the daylight period of the day, the daytime, we'll call it. So you have the daytime and the nighttime. Now, let me explain this, what we're looking at in all these details. So the title is Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday Crucifixions. So we know that the traditional time is Friday, but let's talk about what could it have happened on Thursday or Wednesday. Now this top one here is if it happened on a Wednesday. This middle one is if it happened on a Thursday, and this bottom one is if it happened on a Friday. If we go all the way back to 30 AD, the new moon would have been on, we can do this astronomically, the new moon would have been on March 23rd, and so that would mean that 14 days later would be the Passover, and that would be, in our Gregorian calendar, that would be April 7th. So the Passover would occur on April 7th. That's our 4th month, but in Jewish calendar, it's the 1st month, which is the month of Nisan. It's the 14th, so Passover is on the 14th. No matter where the 14th falls on, that's Passover. Okay, so this blue area on the top, that is our Gregorian calendar. So it shows April, and this top one, that's for the Wednesday case, starts on the 4th, 5th, goes all the way to the 11th. And you can see they're all in this order: Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Okay, now the bottom one is the Jewish one. So you can see it's the month of Nisan, and you can see it's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all the way to Sunday. And on each of these 3 different bars, you'll see that it was that Passover is going to occur on the 14th. That's the commandment in the Bible, to do it on the 14th of Nisan. Now, very important, as I've mentioned a couple times, the Jewish day starts at twilight. So if you look at these, our regular days, they start at midnight. And then, of course, you have some night, the wee morning hours of the day. And then you have daylight. And then you have evening. And then at midnight, you go over to the next day. Now, the Jewish calendar starts at twilight. And so you have the full night, and then you have the full day time, and then at the twilight of the next day, that's when you go to the next day. And for the rest of this time period, for the most part, I'm going to be talking about the Jewish calendar. So let's look at the Wednesday case. So in Wednesday, we see the 14th. Let me go ahead and zoom in. Right now we're zoomed in on Wednesday, and this is the Jewish one, again, from twilight to twilight. That whole day is Passover. So in the very beginning of the day, in the very early part of the night, which is for them is the beginning of their day, is when you have Passover. So I have a little lamb here. That's when they eat the Passover. Then it says that at 9 in the morning, he was crucified. So that's where I have the crucifixion. And then at the end of the day, that's when he's put in the tomb. And it says that they wanted to get him in the tomb before the start of the next day because it was a Sabbath. Well, that Sabbath could have been the Festival of Unleavened Bread. That's what this FUB is. It's too long to fit in there, so I just put the first letters. These are both Sabbaths, Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread. It's also called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is why I keep saying it. And then later in the week, you can see that the regular Sabbath, I have that in green, that is always on a Saturday, no matter what. You have Passover, he's crucified, he's put in the grave, and he's put into the grave either right at twilight or before twilight. Most likely it was before twilight because they wouldn't want to do anything at the beginning of this Sabbath. They had more flexibility during the daytime hours, even though it's still considered a Sabbath, and that's because of the laws about burying the dead. There's also a law in Deuteronomy about not leaving people hanging on trees on a Sabbath, and so that you sort of have a conflict between the various laws where you're not supposed to do work, but then you have somebody who died, and those other things would take precedence during the daytime. And so they could do certain things during the day, so they crucified him. Jews were okay with that. And then it says Joseph of Arimathea came. They came and took the bodies down, and he got him in the grave before twilight. So for the Wednesday case, I tried to align these so I guess you call it the best case scenario. So let's say he was put in the tomb exactly at sundown on at the beginning of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Then he would be in the grave. That's what this kind of orange peach colored is. He would be in the grave until Sunday when he rose. Now, he rose sometime before twilight, or dawn, I should say, before dawn on Sunday. Because by the time the women got there, the stone had been rolled away and the body wasn't there, so he had already had risen. No, we don't know exactly when he rose, but let's just say for the sake of argument that it was exactly at dawn. Then in this case, the Wednesday case, you would have 3 24-hour periods. You'd have the 15th Thursday, the 16th Friday, and the 17th Saturday, and then he would rise on Sunday. Now, if you count the number, I don't know if the pointer is working or not. I hope it is because I'm pointing to all these different things. But if you count the night times and separate, because remember, Jesus said 3 days and 3 nights, he would be in the night of Thursday. Again, this is the first part of the day in the Jewish calendar. So that's one night. And then there would be another night at the beginning of Friday. And then there would be another night at the beginning of Saturday. And then you'd have another night at the beginning of Sunday. So that doesn't work. You have 4 nights. You do have 3 day periods though. So you have the daylight time of Thursday, the daylight time of Friday, and the daylight time of Saturday. And you assume no daylight time on Sunday and no daylight time on Wednesday. So you have you have more than 3 days, and you have 4 nights. Now, if somebody really wanted to believe in a Wednesday crucifixion, then if they say, well, he actually rose from the dead at the end of the Sabbath, before Sunday, and the women didn't get there until the morning, and the guards were all there. They didn't realize they were actually guarding an empty tomb. Then I suppose you could say that it was exactly 3 24-hour periods, and there was 3 evenings and 3 nights. So that's how Wednesday people take it. Okay, now let's talk about Thursday. Now this is the one that I think is actually more plausible, and it works for the 3 days and 3 nights. Now, again, we have Passover. It would be Thursday the 14th in the Jewish calendar. He's crucified in the morning, 9 in the morning. He's put into the grave, and he would be put in the grave well before sunset, so that Joseph of Arimathea doesn't have to break any Sabbath laws, which would start right at dusk. So therefore, he would have some time in the grave during the daytime, the daylight hours of Thursday. That's what this little bit of orange that's over in the Thursday daylight period. So then he would rise sometime before dusk on Sunday, and then he's not in the grave for 3 24-hour periods, but again, he wasn't talking about that. He's talking about 3 night times and 3 day times. So you have 1 daytime, a little bit on Thursday, the full daytime of Friday, and the full daytime of Saturday. And then you have the full evening of Friday, the full evening of Saturday, and most of the evening or all of the evening part of Sunday. So you have 3 nights and 3 days. And so, excuse me, that would fulfill that prophecy altogether. Now, if we go to the traditional one, that's the one at the bottom. So that would be Friday the 14th. That would be Passover, the 14th of Nisan. Again, he'd have Passover meal. He's crucified in the morning of Friday. He's put in the grave. And for the sake of argument, we'll say again, just like we did on Thursday, that there was a little bit of daylight, that he was in the tomb. Now, here you see that the Sabbath, the regular Sabbath, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread are on the same day. So that's 2 Passovers on the same day. So it's just 1 Passover. But nevertheless, it's still the day of preparation, because that's the time that you could prepare on the special Sabbath, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, to make food for this feast. So here, again, he rises. Let's say just for the sake of argument, try to help out this the Friday case. He rose a little bit into the daytime. The sun had already come up, and by the time the women got there, let's say. And so you would have a little bit of, excuse me, you would have a little bit of daylight on Friday, all of Saturday daytime, and a little bit of daytime on Sunday. So there's 3, so that's good. That works with the prophecy. But then you have the evening of all of Saturday's evening, the first part of Saturday, and then all of Sunday, the first part of Sunday. No matter how you move this orange bar, there's no way to get 3 nights. He's only in the grave 3 nights. So then you'd have a problem. Now, some people would say, well, you're thinking about this the wrong way. You shouldn't be, he said 3 days and 3 nights, but don't be so scientific or mathematical about it or whatever. But actually, Jesus was pretty clear to his disciples that all the prophecies had to be fulfilled. And Jesus was pretty specific about these 3 days and 3 nights. And so because of this idea of the Passovers and the Feast of Unleavened Bread being their own Sabbaths, it doesn't have to be a Friday. And you don't have to do any gymnastics about trying to get 3 days and 3 nights, or just kind of punting and saying, well, it wasn't 3 days and 3 nights, but Jesus wasn't being that specific. Instead, you can look at the Thursday case and find that it's very easy to get 3 days and 3 nights. Or you could even look at the Wednesday case, but then you'd end up with 4 nights, unless you do some gymnastics. So that's why I think Thursday is actually a much better, more plausible case, where he was put in the grave with some daylight to remain for that Thursday, the last part of Thursday, if you consider it from the Jewish perspective. And then he's got all Fridays and all of Friday night, and then all of Saturday night and all of Saturday day, and then part or all of Sunday night. Then you end up with 3 daytimes and 3 night times. Okay. All right, so I went over a little bit. I knew that I would, because there was so much to cover. But that is this will all be, of course, in the notes, which I put on my website, which is thewitheredfigtree.com. And these notes will have this picture and everything that you can look at. And I think it's pretty amazing and pretty important as well to know that the Bible is accurate, and that the prophecies, the many prophecies, were all fulfilled, which make Jesus the Messiah. And there were all kinds of prophecies, not just about the one that Jesus made about his resurrection, but also from hundreds and even up to 1,000 years beforehand of what the Messiah, when he would come, and so forth, and what his life would be like. And so it's pretty amazing that God worked this all out so that all those prophecies could be fulfilled by Jesus. And so that's why I thought it was pretty interesting and a good time to do this series called The Dates of Christianity. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. Tell your friends about it. And next week, we're going to start a new series, and it's going to be about the assembly of Christians. So what did it mean for the Christians to assemble? Nowadays, we call it church, but what did it mean for the Christians? And that will most likely be a regular 8-part series. So next Sunday, will be the first part of that new series of the assembly of Christians. So thanks again for joining me tonight. Have a great evening, and goodbye.